Hi all, we're going to continue looking at Fischer's 11-0 whitewash in the 1963 USA Championship. In round 2 he was facing Larry Evans, who was the editor of a magazine apparently which Fischer had published his bust of the King's Gambit, which he had lost to Spassky prior to this game. But that was in the variation with knight f3. Here Fischer played bishop c4. So Fischer's playing quite innovatively in the opening, getting the opponent out of mainstream theory. The idea of the early bishop c4 is to stop any d5s from black, just to be able to take back with the bishop. So this could be quite a dangerous weapon for the club player actually. A lot of people wouldn't be expecting this variation. You allow the check on h4 just to move your king to f1. And so although black's a pawn up, white's going to gain a tempo on the queen, and also potentially a large pawn centre, and this f-pawn being weak. In order for black to try and defend that f-pawn, further weaknesses on the king side are usually created if black is materialistic. Black was a little materialistic in this game. Fischer played here queen e2, supporting that bishop on c4, not allowing black to sort of seal up the pawns with f takes and then e5 with a nice pawn chain. So after c6 he played knight f3, gaining a tempo on the black queen. And now he's not bothered about black playing g5. He didn't try and stop it with, say, h4. He just occupied the centre, hoping, in fact, black would play g5. But first black plays bishop takes c4, simplifying a bit, and now g5. So black's playing kind of materialistically. Look at white's development. The pieces are all quite aggressive here, and the king's quite safe, and furthermore white has basic undermining at his disposal with h4 of black's pawns here, which is going to lead to further damage on the king's side if black's not careful. First Fischer established this central pawn wedge, and I believe white's better out of the opening, even though a lot of engines think black's okay. In practice with humans this is very difficult to play for black. After knight a6, a3 might be a tempting move to stop knight b4, but Fischer just played knight e2. He's not too concerned about any knight b4s, and in fact he just plays actually his queen back to d1. So black castled queen side. Well, that's one way to keep the black king out of danger on the king side, but Fischer, like a modern Adams, is just playing where he's got the pressure. He's got the advantage on the king side, and these pawns have had it, and we're going to see why. First he kicks back that knight to a6, and now he starts his undermining operations. Black's going to lose a lot of control now of the squares, and look in particular at this diagonal, how it will be in white's complete control soon. Black played g4, Fischer not concerned about putting his knight on h2 because it's tempting further weaknesses in the black position, and the f4 pawn is about to drop off here. So h5, knight takes f4, and look at that wonderful knight and this wonderful pawn wedge. And this knight is later going to reroute. We're going to see a lovely rerouting now after sacrificing the h pawn. King g1, so the knight's got a lovely route here, knight f1 to g3. Black now created a massive liability on this diagonal by playing knight h6. As we see, this knight ends up getting gobbled on h6. That is the last move it will play in this game. Fischer first played knight f1, and we see now the h pawn is the first victim of the pressure that white's going to exert. And after rook g8 he gets the other knight to g3, so they're wonderfully active knights on key squares. But it's very easy for white to play on the king side. White has the pressure there. Black has got 0 attacking chances, and Fischer's just going to strengthen now his harassment in effect of this knight on h6, which is this diagonal which he's conquered. It's very, very difficult for black to do anything about this. For example, if he plays knight f5 to try and relieve that knight liability, then knight takes f5 and queen takes g4, and white's massively better, e.g. queen d7, rook to the 7th rank, and it's totally to white's advantage. So the black knight's stuck there miserably, and Fischer just strengthens the pressure on the diagonal and after rook g8 just plays knight fe2, and Evans could have resigned now. He's losing a whole piece. His next move is just hopeless. It's a hopelessly lost position. He's having to give up that knight on f6, so Fischer just takes on f6, takes the knight, and we see a few more moves. Perhaps Evans wanted to make the game length more respectable, but he is just clearly a piece down here for very little compensation, very little attack. In fact, that g-pawn's a shelter if white needs it from the g-file attack or chances to attack. And we see now some simplification just to a completely winning ending, a piece up for white. And here finally Evans resigned. So let's have a look in conclusion and summary at this game. It was an innovatively played opening by Fischer, reviving the King's Gambit a bit, or interest in the King's Gambit, but not playing knight f3 here, playing instead bishop c4, daring outrageously to let the queen check and the king not to castle, because he knows he's going to get a lot of dynamic compensation. He doesn't seal up black's pawn structure with bishop e6, he instead protects that bishop on c4, and he gets a nice central wedge now, this pawn on e5, which guarantees pressure actually on the king side in a lot of variations. And we see now the strengthening actually of the d4 square with this knight e2 and c3, and now we see the domination of Fischer on the king side, in particular this diagonal. So this is really great stuff and quite instructive. Evans could have resigned now after losing the piece, and Fischer just simplified down now, and in this position Evans resigned. So does this make the King's Gambit a viable weapon for, say, club chess? Because if Fischer was able to play it in the 1963 championship, why can't we? Thanks for listening, and see you on YouTube.